This video may seem a tiny bit dark. If it does, it's not entirely without purpose that I'm filming this in the darkness. Because we've been following the story of two friends of Jesus, Cleopas and an unnamed accompanist, who have been walking along the road from Jerusalem to the village of Emmaus. And the events are taking place just after the tragic and horrifying events of Good Friday and Jesus' betrayal and execution and his death. And the reality is that those two friends of Jesus, Cleopas and the other follower of Jesus, were really walking in the dark. They had absolutely no idea. They thought they were going to Emmaus, but Emmaus was just the physical, geographical location, and ironically, in fact, it's not actually known where Emmaus is or was at the time. So they are walking in the unknowing. They're walking in complete darkness. They have no idea what the future holds. They have no idea what their life is going to be like as a community, whether there's going to be any continuing fellowship among those who have considered themselves followers of Jesus. So they are completely unable to see what the future looks like. And as they walk along, as we've seen in the story, they are accompanied by a stranger. And again, they don't see who this person is, although they really should have known. They might have known, could have known, that in fact the person who accompanied them was Jesus. This stranger that walks along with them asks them where they're going and why they're so sad. And so they recount to him the sad and tragic story of Jesus' life and death. And then in the story, we're at the point we've reached this morning, after having told of their hopes that this person, Jesus, would become their Redeemer, their Liberator, they go on and say, yes. And besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. These things being Jesus' betrayal, his death, his crucifixion. It is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. There's a word there that speaks of the reaction that these followers had had when they heard the story from the women of going to the tomb and finding nothing there but just an empty tomb. You say, some of the women of our group astounded us. Astounded us. The Greek word is epistemi, and it means literally to throw out of position, to displace, amaze, astonish, astound. It can mean even to drive a person out of their mind. But I love the first to be thrown out of position. They have been thrown out. The events of the end of Jesus' life have thrown all of his followers out of position. They have been left in confusion, in bewilderment, in doubt, in uncertainty. They just don't know what is going on. And it seems to me that epistemi, this being thrown out of position, being kind of put off kilter, being a little bit out of whack, is in many ways the experience of many people at this time in our world community. we have all been, in many ways, knocked off kilter. We have been kind of put out of our familiar ways that life usually works. We have been cast into profoundly unfamiliar territory. We are, like Cleopas and his friend, we are simply walking in the dark. We don't know, any of us, when the restrictions that we're living under because of COVID, we don't know when they're going to lift. We don't know how much they're going to lift. We don't know if they will be reinstituted after they have lifted, and we discover again that this infection has resurfaced as we begin to come socially closer together with one another. We don't know what our institutions look like going forward. We don't know what our economy looks like going forward. There is just so much that we just don't know. And so the question really is that when we find ourselves in a condition of not knowing, when we find ourselves in a condition where the way ahead, the way forward isn't clear, how do we respond? How do we react when we feel like we're kind of just groping in the dark to try to find our way? What are the skills? What are the gifts we need to find to help us as we feel our way in this unknown and strange territory? And there aren't a lot of clues in the little piece that I read you just a moment ago of these two friends of Cleopas, of these two friends of Jesus, Cleopas and his friend, on the way to Emmaus. But there is one tiny little clue, it seems to me. And the tiny little clue is that they do keep moving forward. They keep putting one foot in front of the other. They keep walking along the road to Emmaus. They don't just stop and with this stranger who is walking along with them now. They don't just stop in the middle of the road and bewail their fate and cry out about how terrible it all is and how broken the world is. They don't just sit down in the dust of the street and complain about the terrible circumstances that they are facing. Instead, they keep moving. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what the future holds, but they keep moving forward. And as they keep moving forward, we will find, as we continue to read the story, that something is born in their hearts. Some new light begins to shine within them. As they keep moving forward, this stranger, this person they don't recognize, they don't know who he is, but he's accompanying them and walking with them even though they don't recognize him and don't understand the nature of who this stranger is that walks along with them. And that's what I think that's the promise. It's the promise of the gospel. It's the promise of the whole of Christian spirituality. It's the promise of the whole of Christian faith. And it hinges on this idea, I think, of faithfulness. That as we remain faithful and true to what we do know, as we continue to allow our hearts to open a little to whatever light we can perceive, then the promise is that the light does grow brighter. We do begin to see more clearly. When times are dark, when it does seem difficult, when we don't know our way forward, the temptation is to feel that this moment is the whole of reality. That this moment of darkness and doubt, of uncertainty and fear, that is all there is to life. But we know surely from experience that as dark as it may be, as much as we may not see the way forward, as long as we do keep putting one foot in front of the other, we do find our way. And people have walked through terrible, terrible darkness. people have walked through situations and circumstances that are beyond belief. And somehow there is something in the human spirit that is kind of indomitable. There is something in the human spirit that doesn't give up. And the only promise is that if we don't give up, if we don't just lay down in the dusty road and bewail our circumstances, if we keep putting one foot in front of the other, then we do draw more closely to the light and the truth and the beauty. And we do come to recognize that in the midst of doubt and uncertainty, in the midst of pain, in the midst of the reality of life situations that are not clear, like nobody really understands precisely what is going on right now in our world. Nobody has perfect answers to the situation that we face. And anybody who does, anybody who comes and purports to have the absolute answer, anybody who purports to come and have all the perfect solutions to the situation that we find ourselves in at this time is a person that we need to approach with great caution. Because the reality is there are simply things in life that we don't control. There are forces in life that we cannot bend to our will. There are things that we don't understand. Heather, my wife's been trying for years to get me to give up the expression, I just don't understand. I try to say it less than I used to. And I think I need to give it up because the assumption in that statement, the exasperation of that statement, is that I ought to understand. That somehow I ought to be able to make sense of my circumstance. Interesting, at the very heart of the Bible, of the scriptures, there's in the Hebrew scriptures, there's a book called Job, the book of Job. And Job is the story of a man who experienced terrible, terrible suffering. And throughout the entire book, he's confronted by friends who come and try to make sense for him of his suffering. And the book ends with just a series of questions. Finally, Job encounters God, and God peppers him with endless questions. How can you think that you would understand the mystery of these circumstances? We do walk in life in the midst of mystery, uncertainty, doubt, and confusion. And just the difference is that sometimes we get to see that more clearly than we do at other times. Sometimes the reality of all that we are unable to know becomes more clear to us. And this is one of those times. It becomes clear to us in the midst of COVID that we really don't understand what's happening. And there is no easy, simple solution. None of the solutions are perfect. None of the solutions are great. People say all this social distancing, all this sheltering in place, it's going to ruin the economy. And, it may have profoundly detrimental effects to the economy. No question about it. But the alternatives are grim. People are dying. People who are vulnerable are at risk. The human community is in a state of disarray around the disease that is afflicting so many. So there are no easy solutions. There are no guarantees that the way forward is going to be simple or easy or even clear. Because like Cleopas and his friend, we've seen violence, we've seen sickness, we've seen death, we've seen incredibly conflicting opinions. But like Cleopas and his friend, if we keep moving forward in whatever degree of light we have, putting one foot in front of the other, we discover that the light grows, and that actually in the darkness there is, you can see behind me here I'm sitting, in front of a door, that we can see that in the darkness there is a door, and that door will eventually begin to open a little, and it looks dark in there too, but when the door opens, we discover that there is more light. There is a way forward, and there does become new promise of life and rebirth in the midst of this darkness. Gracious and loving God, we thank you that in darkness and in unknowing, you open a path as we stay faithful, as we continue to put one foot in front of another. Help us to trust that in this dark time of unknowing, that your light is present, that a way forward is opening for us, and that we can hold that light and truth of your presence deep in our hearts, and the doorway to the future is beginning to open through Christ our Lord. Amen.